Education mismatch is a term used to claim that what people are learning in school is not suitable for employment. The logic is that employment comes from people being badly trained. It is true that people are badly educated, but that is not the reason for unemployment. People are deliberately miseducated so that they do not threaten the system that we have. And people are unemployed because they are not allowed to work. And now CBC and BBI are here to lessen those opportunities to work and to get a good education. How is that possible? What is the link between unemployment, CBC, and BBI? That is what I want to explain in this video. I want to contextualize my discussion by going back to the colonial era. The purpose of the Kenya colony was one, to extract raw materials using African labor and then export those raw materials to the UK. The infrastructure for the extraction was to be built by the Asians. So, for example, the Asians built the railway. And then the raw materials transported on this system would be processed in British factories, and the British factories would sell these processed goods for profit around the world, even to Africans themselves. To maintain this system, the British had to create an apartheid society with Europeans at the top, Asians below them, and Africans at the bottom. This is how the system looked. From this diagram, you can see that raw materials were not for British settlers. It is important to note that British settlers had not been initially planned for, but they insisted on being in Kenya because they were not going to let the British government eat alone. In fact, the settlers fought very hard with the colonial administration while they were here to have a voice in the colonial government's decisions. They even complained that their children were not getting employment because the colonial government was employing only British-born subjects. In response, the colonial government ironically said that it needed to protect Africans and African cultures from European settlers. That is why we need to be very careful when we talk of African culture, because even the British said they were protecting African culture. So we need to know what culture we are talking about. The other thing to note here is that this is a pyramid scheme. The only people who work are those at the bottom, the majority. But the higher up you go in the system, the less you work and the more you earn from people's work. So for this system to survive, you need a lot of force and violence. In other words, most of the people at the very top cannot hammer a nail, they cannot think up an idea, and they cannot care for others. Work-wise, they are paralyzed and they offer nothing. You can also see that I have added guns to this picture. The role of the UK government is still to provide weapons in case there is a revolt against the system. At independence, nothing much changed in the structure and neither at the top of the hierarchy. The stratas were simply Africanized, and Europeans and Asians who wanted to stay were told that that's okay as long as they did what the African political class wanted. Meanwhile, Kenyans were given two escape routes out of the bottom. One is electoral politics and the other is schooling. Elections or electoral politics allowed an African to rise to the top where they could grab as much as possible like the others who were already there. And schooling allowed people to work their way through the education system and eventually join a government post or a corporation, and then as they rise, they could consider joining politics to join the others in eating. In 1978 up to 2013, those escape routes were widened, and they were widened by three things. One was the 844 system. The 844 system removed A level, which was an additional barrier intended to make it harder for people to enter university. The second widening came from the free primary education brought by the NAC government. This meant that more children were entering the school system, and already the obstacles to enter university had been reduced. The third way in which the escape routes were widened was through the Kenyan 2010 constitution. The new constitution removed centralization, gave more people say in their local areas through devolution. It gave more people the ability to enter politics, like MCAs, women, and senators, and it protected people's participation in policy and gave us an independent judiciary that could stand up to the political class. So by 2013, there was more pressure from the people to make the education system and the governance open and democratic. But there were some who had already enjoyed privileges, and they found it very difficult to adjust. Their habits were for the old colonial system, and they could not accept that education and politics had become more open to Kenyans. They were very unhappy. And who were these unhappy Kenyans? The first group was the political families. These are families that had gained advantages during the colonial and independence eras, and they had bigger families because the patriarchs had married several wives. And now, when their children and grandchildren are ready to enter public service, they are finding that there are more Kenyans without blue blood who are also coming to join politics and have an advantage in terms of ideas and work. And they also discovered that the central government had less power because the power had been devolved to the counties. So not only that, the local politicians at the counties had less loyalty to the center because especially the governors and the MCAs were voted directly by the people and held accountable by the people. So the political families were very unhappy with this arrangement. The second group of people who were unhappy with the new dispensation were the civil service. The civil service were used to making orders and never being held accountable. In fact, many times the civil servants, like the provincial commissioners or the district commissioners, were more powerful than the local politicians. But now they were receiving more scrutiny from Kenyans who were demanding public participation in policy and even taking the government to court to hold them accountable for their policy. The civil service does not like this accountability and were interested in seeing it go away. The third group of people who did not like the system was the academia. The university professors and PhD holders did not want competition from younger people who had equivalent qualifications, who were more tech savvy and had a wider global knowledge. And so they were not happy to see the system expand. In this group, I would also add other cultural producers like the media and the church. The media started getting challenged from Kenyans who were able to put their voices and their work out there through social media and other technological advancements. The same for the church, which was now having to deal with people who were questioning religion and its role in Kenya today. And the last group was the private sector. The private sector did not like the expanded system because more educated people meant people were likely to understand the importance of fairness in payment. They were likely to demand fairer wages, and they were likely to demand a better business environment. The other reason why the private sector does not want expanded opportunities in Kenya is because it has run out of ideas for innovation and it has started cannibalizing social services. So the private sector wants to privatize education, privatize healthcare, and privatize all the other social services which should be paid for by the taxpayer. They cannot do that if Kenyans are aware of what is happening and if they are aware of the need for social services to be provided to all citizens. So, how are these groups of people going to protect their status? Enter BBI and CBC. Both BBI and CBC do one important thing. They protect the political and cultural elites from new entrants. Who does BBI protect? BBI is for protecting the families of political grandparents who joined politics in the 1960s and had several wives and now have enough children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren to run the government, but most of the time they are hopelessly incompetent. They have no skills, no ideas. And who does CBC protect? CBC protects the children whose parents are already educated and are already working in top administration jobs. They are protected through two things. The first thing that CBC does is to protect children of the already educated parents through what they call parental involvement. Parental involvement means that parents have to participate in the children's homework and whatever else the child does. This greatly advantages the children of the educated, and it does not cater for children whose parents are poor, are not around, or whose parents are not educated. The second way in which CBC protects the advantage of the few is through assessments. As you know, CBC will test more and more. And what will happen is that these tests will reduce the number of children who finish in the education system. It will also punish teachers for poor results of children, even though the poor results may be due to hunger or learning disabilities or other special needs. And that way, the political class and the civil service can continue destroying the teachers' unions. In the end, those who complete education are those who are already advantaged. So, what will CBC and BBI do to society? What they will do is to split the political elite and the middle class further into two additional layers. BBI will create a new layer of dynasties who will already have a foot in government and who are using tribal numbers. This will leave the smaller tribes and the first generation politicians, meaning the politicians who are the first in their family to enter politics. They will be made to beg the bigger families and the more established families for space. And even within the bigger tribes, everybody from smaller families or less influential families will be having to pay tribute to the bigger families if they are to enter politics. In other words, if I come from a family or a tribe that does not have political connections, I will have to praise, worship, bribe, and beg an already established political family if I want to enter politics. CBC, on the other hand, will create a new group of bureaucrats who will use the advantages they already have to rise in the system. You will notice that neither of these groups will be working. They are what we call a rentier class because they will not be earning from work or producing anything, but simply collecting rent on the work of others. So, what will the political class collect rent on? They will peddle influence and sell diplomatic connections with the outside world. They will also tell people that to win an election, you have to talk to them nicely and then they sort you out. The bureaucrats will collect rent on money, on knowledge, on risk, and on space. You will notice that I have mentioned the fire sector. FIRE stands for finance, insurance, and real estate. So finance people rent money, insurance rents risk, academics will rent knowledge by providing certificates, and real estate people will rent space. None of these people produce. They are making rent on products that others make. But you are going to hear these renters preaching to us like holier than thous, telling us about industrialization. But they don't want industrialization because they can't make money that way. Industries take too long to build. They require technical and advanced skills, which they don't want to invest in. Collecting rents on money, on licenses, on knowledge, and on risk is easier and faster. But there's another thing they've started talking about that is very, very evil. They are talking about exporting us as laborers, even on ships. They call that maritime economy, which is another word for. But if exporting African labor 400 years ago did not develop Africa, why should it work now? And why do they want to send Africans abroad? So that they are not here to vote and to make political demands. In other words, CBC and BBI will worsen unemployment. The system will become unstable because the top is going to become too heavy for the rest of us to carry as our incomes and our resources are being reduced. We are going to work more and more for less and less and still not produce enough for the greed of those at the top of the pyramid. And the professionals will not be spared. If they don't have relatives in high places, their training will count for nothing. Eventually, the top will become so bloated that the whole system will crack because the majority will no longer accept to work so hard to feed people who do not work. And so we will need more police and more soldiers and more guns to keep this system up. So when elites talk of an education mismatch, they want us to believe that we are where we are because we did badly in school or because we got the wrong education. They want to hide the fact that we have a problem with the structure of our economy. What is the alternative? We have to break this pyramid and construct a circle of love where people work and contribute to society no matter how small their contribution. That was the promise of the 2010 Constitution. The Constitution gave us a voice, it gave people more say in policy and in politics, and it decentralized power. With the Constitution, we did the legal work, but now we have to do the social work. We need to protect education and expand culture. We need to end censorship. We need to fund the arts and more media and more sources of information like libraries. We need to expand our ideas about qualifications and experience. We also need to have a fair business environment where the focus is not on enterprise, on people's ideas and their work, and not on entitlement or tenders. We also have to care for one another. We have to care for our children and our youth, for women. We have to care for the poor and the marginalized. The BBI proposal of 1 vote, 1 shilling is cynical and uncaring and soulless. It is basically saying that smaller communities which did not get institutional power from colonial times, they have to beg to stay in Kenya. If we care for every human being, for every Kenyan, we must not accept to discriminate against some of us because of a historical accident. We also need to have more respect and care for the environment. Our ancestors taught us through stories and other ceremonies to respect the world in which we live and to take care of it like they are like human beings. The kind of arrogance we have where we think that space and land are for selling and for exploiting without returning back to the environment must be done away with. We also need a new economic and social relationship with the world. We need to reach out to other African countries on the continent. We need relationships with other countries on the basis of cooperation and friendship, not just business. We cannot grow if Kenya is so dependent on the former colony in a relationship of violence and extraction. In other words, we need Ubuntu. We need Ubuntu to be a national philosophy of love, care, and solidarity. So the choice is ours. Do we want to live in this pyramid scheme, or do we want to keep working on a circle of love? Do we want this, which is essentially this, or do we want this? I choose this.